Katie, welcome back to 3 and 30.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome.
We are so glad to have you. I'm like, this is your fourth round on 3 and 30. We've had you more than any other guest. You're our favorite guest on 3 and 30. And I'm so excited about your new book, which I am holding in my hands. The Parenting Toddlers Workbook. It is fabulous. I read every single page and you're just brilliant. I love it so much.
Thank you. It was a work of love for sure.
Yes.
For sure. I'm so happy to hear that somebody who has studied as much as you have and has dedicated her life to this work still loves the book.
Oh, yeah. Well,
that says something to me.
I mean, that's why I love the book, because I feel like you've taken so many principles from these other books that I've read and you just made them so much simpler and more actionable for parents, because not many parents are going to wade through a 300-page parenting book when they're in the throes of dealing with tantrums and behaviors. And you've just made it so straightforward, so applicable. And when I was reading it, I'm like, this is just the best of the best all put into one book. So congratulations.
That's awesome. Yeah. You know what? Parent time is sacred. That's why your podcast is probably my favorite parenting podcast. It's like 3 and 30 minutes. Let's get in and get done. I don't got a lot of time.
Totally.
So let's get what we need and get out of there.
Yes.
So I appreciate that.
Yes. And one of the things that I love the most in your book, as I mentioned in that introduction, is the sections on limits. Because as I mentioned in that intro, I feel like I've struggled with this. I have always prioritized connection, parenting without guilt and shame, but I felt like a disconnect between, well, how do I still have limits for them if I'm parenting in a way that's positive focused? And I love how your book says that both are possible and teaches how both are possible. And one of kind of the core things that you teach is that you say that limits are an expression of love. So I was wondering if we could start with you kind of explaining that. How are limits an expression of love?
All right. Limits. Limits create safety for the child, and they clarify expectations. They allow the child to have opportunities for self-mastery, and they give the child an opportunity to really learn family and cultural values in a safe environment. That's huge. But limits are also really self-loving. I think that they're a way for the parent to take care of themselves too, because we create these important boundaries between self and child that benefit everyone, that create more peace, that keep us less activated, yelling less, and feeling less angry and more kind of settled in that relationship. So the limits really do benefit everybody in the system. And to me, that is why I'm just so insistent that they're loving, that this is love. Yeah.
I love that it's an act. Their limits are loving, not just for children, but also for ourselves. By putting those limits in place with our children, it's an act of self-care, and it makes us so that we're more emotionally available for our children when we put those limits into place. And I think just teaching them good behavior is so loving, because they go out into the world, and if you haven't taught them, then they don't know any different, and you haven't set them up for success in the world.
It feels good to be good. It feels good to meet other people's expectations. It feels good to kind of have a sense for what's right, what's the right way to behave, or what's the appropriate way to behave. It feels good whenever we have self-control. Those things, that's how esteem is built. I call them in my book, I call them esteemable acts. And funny side note, my publisher took all of the esteemable out and put estimable. And then I would go back in and I would rewrite it esteemable. And then eventually the copy editor won. But whenever you read the word estimable in my book, what I mean is self-esteem building.
Self-esteem building, that when they know the limit and they can abide by it, it builds their self-esteem, versus them not, kind of floundering in the world without somebody giving them those limits and boundaries to help them behave well.
Right. Yeah.
And I do feel like with this focus on parenting without shame, how do you shift like your own mindset around limits so that you can do it without shame? You talk about how there's some myths that we have about
Yes.
limits and about our children, and if we can kind of shift those myths, then we can set limits without shame.
Right. So before we even get into the takeaways, I really do feel that we need to dive into the mindset shifts that you could establish right now that will help you create loving limits and help them come naturally. There are a few kind of roadblocks that keep us from doing limits well and from letting them just flow out of us. So the first one I would say is, for me, this has been absolutely huge, but you got to understand that your child's actual neurological capacity for self-control doesn't even begin to develop until they're 3 or 4. And that is not that doesn't counter indicate the necessity of limits, you know?
Right.
Just because your child's actual neurological capacity for self-control doesn't even begin to develop. I mean, I can't say that enough. So whenever a child acts out and you've told them not to, I think it's best if parents kind of catch a beat and understand that their capacities for self-control are very, very limited.
Hmm.
The next mindset shift is you got to just fully buy into that developmental perspective. The reason I can create and force limits with such ease and love in my house and with zero shame is because I fully believe, like drank the Kool-Aid, that my role is to assist them with my expectations and their big feelings until they are able to do it themselves. So I really do look at it like they are a developing human. I have the skill set and the expectation. I have the frontal lobe. It is my job to help them along and to meet those expectations and then to help them deal with the big feelings that come along with experiencing limits. So you got to buy into that developmental perspective.
Yeah.
And finally, I think that you got to know that just because something is normal doesn't mean it's acceptable. That's huge in letting go of the shame, I think. You can say, this is normal, but it's not acceptable. In my book, I have an example, for instance, of the dog that jumps up and jumps all over you. It's like super normal for a dog to be very excited when you come home, but it's not acceptable for them to jump up, to express that excitement in that particular way. And so your job is to help your child move from that base, quote, normal impulse to your family's acceptable expression of that impulse and acceptable behavior. So yeah, those are my 3 things that you just like dig in before we even start with the takeaways. You got to know those 3 things and it'll help you so much.
Yeah. So, and it removes the shame from it because you're not saying that the child is bad for having that behavior. You recognize that the behavior is normal. And so, and also that you're not a bad parent because they exhibited that behavior. Because I think so often when our kids act out, we take it almost personally and we think that it has something to do with us, which just adds to our anger and everything else. But when we recognize, no, actually, it's normal for a 2-year-old to hit her friend when she wants something.
Yes.
It doesn't mean she is a deviant. It doesn't mean I am a bad mom. But I
Yes.
also can't just excuse it and say, oh, that's normal. Haha, moving on. I need to set a limit and say,
yes,
and teach her. And we're going to talk about how to set that limit lovingly. But the shame is gone when you recognize this is normal behavior. But I'm going to teach her that what's acceptable and what is not.
Right. A lot of parents really stop there. They have a hard time with limits because they understand or they believe or they know that this child doesn't have much self-control and it's normal for them to want to play by making messes. And so they don't help the child clean up or not make the mess. You know, it's normal for a toddler to walk over to your bookshelf and pull all the books off of the case. That's normal behavior. But helping them understand that this is not acceptable behavior. We've taken all the books off the shelf, my goodness, but we like to keep things clean. So let's pick them up and put them back on together. And if she keeps doing it, then it's a matter of, You just keep pulling the books off the shelves. Today, you just can't help but pull those books off the shelves. I'm going to have to stop you until you can stop yourself. I'm going to have to take you into the other room, or I'm going to have to move the books.
Yes. And I just feel like it's so, I feel like we think it has to be one or the other, where we're like, it's normal, so I just ignore it and let them get away with whatever. Or we think it's not normal and we take it personally and we shame them and we shame ourselves,
Yes.
when really there
Yes.
has to be this combination, this understanding, like you said,
Yes.
that they
Yes.
don't have the ability to self-regulate. They don't have the frontal lobe. And so
Right.
in your book, I love that you say something like, we give it, our frontal lobe is their frontal lobe.
Uh-huh. They don't
Like,
have it.
right.
So the situation needs a frontal lobe. And guess what, mama? It's yours.
Yeah.
Yours is the one that's called to action. I mean, because they don't have it, you know?
Right. And that's, limits are the way that we sort of are giving them a frontal lobe
Yeah.
by setting
Kind of,
those
yeah.
limits. Yeah.
Yes, of course. And then like lovingly enforcing them and kind of coaching them to deal with that. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So let's go into, do you want to head into your takeaways now? I think that would be, you have some
Yeah,
examples
let's
here.
do it.
I'm looking at the outline. Should we head into takeaways? Did you want to give some more examples first? How do you want to go?
I think, well, I gave the example of the ottoman, so we can dive into takeaways.
Okay. You didn't give
I
the
mean, no, I
example.
didn't give the example of the ottoman. I gave the example
Yes.
of the bookshelf.
Yeah.
But we can bring up the ottoman again later. Let's not forget it, because I think that they'll like hearing that interaction between us and
Yeah, I do too. I
you.
think it can fit in with a takeaway here. Okay. So how do we create these loving limits? I think a lot of us know we want this. We want to
Mm-hmm.
have better loving limits with our kids, but how do we do it? And I love that you really break this down and make it more practical in your book. So walk us through this. How does a parent develop loving limits, shame-free limits with their kids?
Yes, that serve the child, that actually serve you and serve the whole system. So
Yes.
the first takeaway here is you really need to know a bit about your values, your own personal limitations, and your hopes for the child.
Mm,
That limits that you are motivated to enforce really do need to flow out of a value system and an understanding of your limits.
mm,
Um, so that you know what you're working towards, and so that your values can be firm, your expectations can, no, let's start over. I don't like that. I was about to say something else. All right.
And let's
All right,
say
so start
for this takeaway, can we do, I put a note there, but can you do it like an action verb at the beginning of that? So like
okay.
clarify or identify your values, personal
Okay.
limits, and hopes for your
Yes, yes,
child
yes, yes.
versus this, it's more vague. You need to know a bit about your values. Because you're saying
Yes.
actually sit down and write it out, right? And figure it out. Like
Right. Right.
identify what those things are.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
all right. So
All righty.
I'll just ask you
Let's,
again. I'll start that question again.
okay.
Um, so I feel like most parents have a sense that they want this. They want loving limits with their children, but they don't really know how to do it. And so that's what we want, is to walk listeners through 3 takeaways, really practical, of how to establish loving limits. So what's your first takeaway, Dr. Katie Penry?
All right. My first
I never know
takeaway.
if I should call you Katie, Dr. Penry, or Dr. Katie. You said you don't like Dr. Katie, right?
Dr. Katie makes me feel like Dr. Phil. Anyway. All right. First takeaway to setting limits that you're actually motivated to enforce is clarifying your values, understanding your personal limits, and really identifying your hopes for your child.
Mm. And how do you do that?
Sitting down and exploring these 3 things.
Okay,
Okay?
so what
You
are
want
the
to know a
3
little bit
things
about
again?
that?
Tell us
All
again
right.
what they are.
So, values, personal limits, and hopes for your child. All right, so let's dive into those really quickly. The first one, boundaries that are anchored in values are so much easier to enforce.
Mm,
So if we can sit down and think intentionally about those, it is just so helpful. In the
mm,
book, I give a few examples of value categories that you might want to explore to kind of help you begin uh, shaping your limits. Those are behavioral expectations, or safety, health and nutrition, community participation, family, and relationships. So those are a few kind of value categories that you can begin to think about. What is it in those areas? Like, how safe do I want my child to be? What do I value in terms of their eating habits? How do I want them to participate in community? Do I want them to be service oriented, volunteer oriented? Do I want them to be very individualistic, or would I rather them be more communal? These things.
Yeah. Can you give an example of, like, let's say one for, I'm just going to choose a category for, like, behavioral expectations. Was that a category? Values. What are the different ones? Safety,
I
health.
said it, but I
Oh,
didn't.
family. Okay. Let's give an example for like family and relationships. So I think we think like, well, I want all them to do everything well. And I want
Yeah.
like, how do you narrow in on what like your specific value is within that? Can you give an example of like something that other families might value that you don't necessarily value? What's your value within one of those categories?
Um, okay, for family and relationships, which is the one you suggested, respect for elders is really big for
Mm,
us. And
mhm.
so whenever my children enter into someone else's home, they always like greet the person as best that they can. And
Mm.
oftentimes I have to help them. And they always say, well, I'm Southerner. So we say ma'am and sir, but just a kind of deference that this person deserves respect. And that might be particular to Southerners, but that's very important to me. And so I try and think of ways that I can facilitate that value with my limitations.
Mm. With the limits that you give them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So like whenever we walk into a home, even whenever I had hip babies, I'm going first to the host of the home, or the host of the play date, and I'm introducing myself. I'm saying thank you so much, and I'm looking to the child and just saying, isn't this so wonderful? Thank you so much. Like, I'm joining with the child to kind of express this value together.
Mm.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, I love that. Do you have an example of a value that maybe you've let go of? Like it's not a top value for you but it might be for other families?
I think that as I've matured as a parent, I used to have a lot of health and nutrition limits, what they couldn't eat,
Mm.
that I have kind of let go of, especially, whenever you're talking about valuing connection, at some point with my son, I don't know what it is, but he cannot eat meat. He just doesn't eat meat. And um, navigating that, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I hold that value. It matters that you eat what I cook, and it really matters to me that you are healthy. But gosh, my expectations for what he's really capable of have changed. And so how I facilitate his diet has changed. I
Mm.
still have limitations. I still have values. I just have to find new ways to express those things to him, because he
Mhm.
just isn't going to eat the meat that I put in front of him. He's just not.
Yeah.
So that's probably
Yeah.
the most away from, like, so we need to clarify our values. Now we need to clarify our personal limits and hopes.
Yes. Yes. I'm
Right.
going to add one thing about the clarifying our values though. Um
Okay.
I've seen an example of this with even within my own sisters. I feel like we all parent very similarly, and I really respect the way that they parent. But we have different values around different things. Like I have a sister who it's very important to her, to her and her husband, that the children eat everything on their plate and they eat what's been
Yes.
given them. And whereas that's not really a battle that we fight in my home with my kids, and maybe it's because my kids have different temperaments, maybe it's because we just have a different value. My sister's husband is like a gourmet chef and he loves to cook,
Mm.
and it's very
Hmm.
important to him that his kids have a diversified palate, whereas I'm kind of like whatever, so that's
Right.
an example of you can't fight every battle, you can't have every limit, but you do it based on your family's values.
It's also a really great example of how you let go of a lot of shame and wasted energy when you clarify your values first. It's
Mm,
really mature of you to understand that, well, my sister just values something different than me, and there's
hmm.
nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
So the way we parent at the dinner table is just going to be different, and that's okay. I don't have to judge myself by her value.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's figuring out your values. And then our other categories in there were, what else are we figuring out, identifying?
All right, you got to clarify your own personal limits. I love this one, because whenever you whenever your boundaries recognize or reflect your own personal limitations, they can actually protect you from undue stress, help you yell less, help you be less angry. So you might want to consider your history of trauma, your stress levels, your sensitivity to noise and risk, how easily you're embarrassed. All of those things that are actually a part of our temperament, they matter too. They matter
Mm,
too.
yeah. When I read this takeaway in your outline, it was kind of an aha moment for me because I think I've always thought that my personal limit shouldn't be taken into consideration. I sort of thought like, well, I need to change before my
Mm-hmm,
kids do. For example, I have a very, very quiet husband and
mm-hmm,
he needs quiet and peace. Like he thrives on that. And I
mm-hmm.
think I've always thought, well, he needs to change, not the children. But are you saying here that like you can take into consideration your own personality and temperament and set limits accordingly? That's okay.
That's absolutely okay. In the
I love that
instance
you're
of your
laughing.
husband, well, because I mean, yes, it's both. I mean, your husband needs to be flexible and move towards the children, and the children need to understand a little bit about him at a certain age. They're ready to really learn about his temperament and his subjectivity, and they need to be moving and respecting that as well, like kind of moving towards a center place on that.
Yeah.
So, and this, it can be different with everything, but just in particular, the noise thing is huge for me too. I'm always been easy startle. I get really hyper aroused really quickly if like there's a lot of loud noise. I can feel it in my nervous system. It's just not conducive to great parenting. So we have to be kind of careful. Like inside voices is a very firm value in our house, you
Mm,
know? Like, and if they just keep using their outside voice inside, well, we're just too excited. We got to go outside.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love what you said there about how it's not conducive to great parenting. You have to recognize your own limits that like if I don't have a limit around this, I'm going
Right.
to become overstressed and I'm not going to be able to parent well. And so it's actually loving for my kids and me to have
Right.
a limit or a boundary here. Like for me, a huge one is alone time. I need it. I
Yes.
have to have it. My kids will do a quiet time every day because I
Uh-huh.
am not a good mom when I
Yes.
don't get that time. I can't parent from the best that's within me. So it's loving to all of us for me to hold
That's
that
right.
limit.
That's right. Absolutely. And this is really particularly important for people with trauma. There, I mean, people with trauma can get really hyper aroused, and around little things. Sometimes like a certain kind of touch is very triggering. Whenever you're triggered, you're not being your best self. So try and help your kid not trigger you, and
Mm,
you try and work on your triggers. Let's work on this as a family.
yeah, so good. And then what's the last thing we need to think about when we're figuring out our limits?
I think that you should really sit down and try and clarify the the hopes and beliefs that you have about success and what you want for your child. And to me, that's a little bit different than values, because sometimes in my book, I have this exercise where I actually walk you through and imagine like creating a narrative about the prototypical well-behaved child. Just like go ahead, write it out, be as detailed as you can, and then look at it and wonder, is this actually reasonable? Because you will subconsciously attach yourself to those hopes and those expectations. So
Mm,
go ahead and look at them and lose them if they're not helpful. Like, it is not. If your idea of successful parenting is zero tension in the house and no arguing with your siblings, like, let's get a little real. Like, let's name it. That's not really reasonable. And how can we be a little looser there? Maybe you need a mantra whenever your kids start to argue, or whatever it is, where you say, my expectation is a little bit higher than my child's ability, or than what is reasonable. And just kind of understanding some of those, trying to flush out some of those subconscious hopes for your kids.
Yeah. Well, I love, because at first when you said that, go ahead and write it out, like your dream child, basically. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like, is that really healthy to write it out and put it into words? Because I don't want to hold my kids to that standard. But you're saying it's already there subconsciously, and you are holding your kids to that standard. And sometimes writing it out makes you see, this is not reasonable. Like what I'm
Yeah.
imagining. But what pieces of this are reasonable? What pieces of this do I want to build a limit and around? And what
Mm-hmm.
can I let go of, taking into
Yeah.
consideration the temperaments of my children may not
Right.
match with this
Right.
beautiful vision I
Yes.
have.
Right. I can't tell you how often I have had people, I threw this in probably as an adult psychotherapist, really holding that self state in mind, because I can't tell you how many people come into my office trying to figure out who they are because their parent had a different ideal,
Mm,
and it's like, I grew up not matching, not being athletic, and my parent thought that the prototypical successful child was very athletic. So, you know, go ahead and write it out, and then take an honest look at who your child actually is, and try and work these things out together,
mm,
holding all of those things. So
yeah.
that's my first takeaway. You got to clarify your values, personal limits, and hopes. That's a big step, but it's a really important one.
Yeah.
The next one is really action oriented, and you got to get out your pen and paper for this one, because it's a template. You got to know the template for introducing and supporting limits. All right.
Okay.
Everybody likes to be able to have a kind of script, or to have
Yeah.
like a
Oh,
few
yeah.
action steps that they can take whenever they're first getting started. And, so here are your training wheels. Number one, state the boundary and the limit clearly. Okay. You cannot hit me.
Mm.
Tell them what they can do. You can touch me like this, or you can sit on the floor. Okay. Help them if needed by acting with compassion. If they can't stop hitting you, then it's time for you to act with compassion. So hold on to their arms. It's not okay for you to hit mama. I'm going to have to hold you like this until you can hold yourself. Or put them on the floor. I have to put you down if you're going to hit me, because I just can't let you hit me. And
Mm.
then acknowledge their feelings. So if the tantrum starts, but I don't want you to put me down. I couldn't, I was just hitting you. Help them deal with that. This is so hard. I know that you want to be held, and I know that you want to hit me. Those two things just don't coexist in this universe. Don't use those big words, but I'm like, you're trying to help your kid understand that. So have compassion, acknowledge their feelings, get down there and help them deal with your limit. All right. So that's the
Yeah.
template. That's the best template I can give.
Yeah. Tell us the 4 parts of the template again.
All right. So state that boundary or the limit clearly, succinctly. Tell them what they can do instead. All right. Don't live in a world of no's. Try and live in a world of you can do. Okay. So you state that boundary. You tell them what they can do instead. If they can't stop, then you help them, if needed, by acting with compassion, maybe introducing a consequence. And then you acknowledge their feelings.
Mm.
Pretty easy.
Yeah. And I love that. And in a lot of the examples you give in the book, if it seems like you lead out a lot of the times with the positive. So you'll say, like, I can see that you have so much energy right now. I
Yes.
love that. We don't jump on furniture when we have energy. We can
Mm-hmm.
go jump outside. And if you need
Mm-hmm.
help, I'll walk you out there, So you're
Right.
always like leading with the positive. There's no shame in it. It's, you're validating their emotion or their need, but you're also setting that limit as you do it.
Okay. So let's walk through a relevant experience that you and I actually share. So,
Yes.
okay, Rachel comes to visit me. She has been driving for I don't know how long with all of her kids in this rental van. They were
Camper
camping.
van.
Yeah, the camper van. Okay.
2 weeks. We had been on the
I
road for
mean,
2 weeks.
yes. And they're coming to me at the end of those 2 weeks. All righty. And they had been driving since for hours that day to come to me. And so it's the evening, they're getting there around supper time. And I open up the door to greet Rachel. The kids blow in. Of course they blow in. And Sally immediately starts jumping on the ottoman. Okay.
The beautiful white ottoman.
Yeah.
Which we should also add that this is the first time we've ever actually met in person. We've become
That's
very
right.
good friends online, but we'd never met in person. First thing my kids do, blow into your house and start jumping on your nice ottoman. So that was
Yeah, like
awesome.
the furniture. And so I turned to her. I turned to her and I said, my goodness, you are so happy to be out of the car, but we just don't jump on the furniture in this house. This is something that we put books on, or this is something we prop our feet on when we're sitting on the sofa. You can go outside and you can run and get all that big energy out,
Yes.
And of course she stopped and was absolutely precious about it and didn't have a tantrum or anything. We didn't have to go further than that, but I, I, I wasn't, it was absolutely normal for her to have way too much energy wrapped up in that tiny little body. She had been in the van for forever, And so it's just looking at her with compassion, understanding, trying to have empathy about her day, and just explaining my limit without creating shame. Like, she's not bad for jumping on the furniture. She was really doing what a human that age does whenever they have a lot of energy in their body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love, I feel like it is the compassionate thing to teach the child what is expected and to teach them how to behave, like versus not saying anything, but being really annoyed and frustrated with the child. And that's not respectful to the child to not even tell them what it is that you're annoyed or frustrated about. And we talked about afterwards that I feel safer around people that will just tell me or will just tell my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's an act of trust, and I want my kids to have other adults in their life set limits for them, so they see that it's not just their mom that sets limits, it's other people
Right.
too. So I felt like that was an act of friendship and trust, that you would have a limit in your home for my child.
Yes. 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 So another example about like setting limits for another person's child, because for me, it means I value our friendship. Like, I want you to just come down whenever and bring the kids. But that means I'm going to have to teach your kids what it's like to be in my house.
Mm-hmm.
Frank had a play date, his first post-COVID play date outside in the pool. And one of his sweet little friends just got obsessed with the Polaris, which is a machine that cleans the pool. And our machine that cleans the pool is the most expensive machine because my husband works a ton and I hate messing with the pool. So we just bit the bullet and got the best one. Okay. And it's cool. My kids call it the pool dozer. It's like this amazing little robot that just rolls all over our pool. And anyway, so
Of course he was obsessed with it.
yes, of course he was. And I explained, so I had it pulled out of the pool. And now he's soaking, dripping wet, and he goes over to it like, oh, it's the bright light. And I stopped him and I said, oh goodness, let me show you how this works. Isn't this amazing? So I'm recognizing his absolutely normal interest. And okay, so he did that, but then he just could not let it go. I mean, he kept coming back to it. And I'm like, oh, we don't touch it. Let's not, because they were wanting to pull it back into the pool, I was like, oh, let's not do that. What can I help you with? And eventually I ended up putting it away. And now I'm having to do all this in front of this other mother. And I'm doing that because I want this child to come over to my house. I want Frank to be able to have this play date again and again and again and again. I want to respect this child, understand that he's capable of hearing my limits with compassion and respect. And if he just can't, it's just too amazing, he can't stop looking at it, he can't stop messing with it, then no big deal. I just have to help you by putting it away. So
And I love that mindset of I can see you need my help.
Yes.
Like I can
Yes.
see that you need my help, so I'm going to enforce this limit because I love you, because I care about you. And
Right.
I think when we come at our, discipline quote from that angle, that then it does feel so much more positive and shame free of, I can see you need some help. I can see you need a frontal lobe right now. And I'm going
Right.
to, I'm going to be that frontal lobe for you.
Yeah. So you can see why before we even started the takeaways, I was like, there's a few things you got to get. You got to understand that they are developing, and you got to understand that that kids behave in normal ways, that it's not acceptable, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yes,
So
totally.
that's how you get rid of that shame.
Great. Okay, so we know the template now, so we can plug in our own, our own children's behaviors into that little template to figure out how to set those loving limits. And I feel like we did a pretty good job of leading into this next takeaway already, but what's your third takeaway?
So using consequence couplets. So the third part of my template is acting with compassion, but that's like a whole thing. And although we've already kind of like you said, led into it, uh, the way that you act with compassion is really using consequences, essentially natural consequences, and understanding that consequences aren't the same thing as punishments. They are not arbitrary. They are real. Life has consequences, and it's okay to introduce your very young child to consequences.
Mm,
I call them in the book, I call them consequence couplets. Um, if you do this, then this happens. And it's kind of the way we live our life. If I throw an egg off the balcony, it will break.
mm-hmm.
That's a consequence couplet. And so whenever you're talking about it with your child, it's, if you keep hitting me in the face, I can't hold you.
Mm,
And if you pull the books off the shelf, then we're going to have to go to a different room, or I'm going to have to put the books up. But either way, I've got to stop you until you can stop yourself, that kind of
mm,
thing. But it starts with that consequence couplet.
yes.
If you're screaming and running in the house and playing chase in the house, you got to do that behavior outside, you
Yeah.
know?
If you do this, then this will happen. And
That's right.
it's very clear, which I love.
Yes.
One of the sentences in your book that I underlined is that gentleness doesn't mean ambiguity or flexibility. And in fact, and I wrote off to the side there, actually, gentleness, like if you're being truly loving and gentle and kind, you will not be ambiguous or
Yes.
flexible. The
Yes.
kind thing is to be clear. you
And
know
consistent.
Yes,
Yes.
clear and consistent is
Yes.
kind.
Yes.
Ambiguous and flexible is not. And I think that's what I run into with my children sometimes is like I care so much about their feelings and that I'm kind of ambiguous, and how confusing for them. Like I'm like, "Well, I don't think you can do that, but maybe it's okay if you do that in the right
Mm-hmm.
setting
Mm-hmm.
with the," and
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "What the heck?" versus just saying, "If you do this, then this will happen. If you
Mm-hmm.
cannot stop screaming in the car with your cousins while grandpa's driving and trying to focus, then
Mm-hmm.
I will come and I will sit in the back between you."
Yes.
That's an
Yes.
example from
That
a
I
recent
can't
road
help
trip we
that.
took.
Oh, you don't like it here? It's just, this is physics. I mean, I do treat consequence couplets like that, like almost like it's physics, man. I don't view myself as the enforcer. I view myself as the person that helps them cope with this consequence. It's
Mm,
like I can't help. I know I have to put you down every time you hit me. I hate it too. I remember that feeling of just wanting to be strong and wanting to be excited with my arms, and then not being able to do everything that I wanted to do, or
right.
whatever it
Yes.
is, like having some compassion for this for this limit that you've set, helping them cope with it. That's really how I view myself. And of course, these consequences sometimes are flexible, but life consequences are flexible. Like you, you can splatter paint in the right situation, but you can't splatter paint inside the dining room or
Mm,
whatever it is. And if
yes,
you
yes.
splatter paint inside the dining room, then we lose our paints because we're just
Right.
having a hard time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But part of that, parents don't understand that that's really kind of a part of growing up, understanding the nuances of consequences. And you can help them with that too. Like, oh,
Mm.
yes, we did splatter paint at the art studio. So now you feel like you can splatter paint here. That's something we're just going to have to learn, that we can't do it in this place. You see what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And I do feel like being decisive is an important skill and
Yes.
trait as a parent,
Yes.
and maybe something that doesn't come supernaturally to certain temperaments like mine. I think I am always open to hearing other people's opinions or side or whatever. Like that's key to my temperament, is that I like to hear the different options and the different sides and different viewpoints. But when it
Yeah.
comes to parenting, that's not always the best thing, because
Right.
I listen to my son and his viewpoint, and then I'm like, okay, I can see that. All right. Like, and I change my mind, which for an
But your
8-year-old,
son is, but now he's 8,
yeah,
and he's kind of learning some of those skills, and you're
yeah,
entering into a more dialogical relationship with him.
hmm,
So, that's very different than with a 3-year-old,
yes, for
you
sure.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. But even with him, sometimes I think he really does need me to be more decisive.
Yes.
Um, I'm not going to go into too many particulars, but it's the friends who are on the trip with us when we came to meet you, they have a teenage son who had a struggle, and they were talking through it with you, and you said to them, he can sense that you're not sure about your decision.
Yes.
And as
Yes.
long as he can sense that, he is going to push against it and he's going to act out. You said you
Mhm.
need to tell him, this is the decision. We know you
Mhm.
don't like it, but we're your parents and we
Mhm.
know best for you. And
Yes.
you're not going to change our minds. And they
Yes.
told me later that after, like, that changed everything when they were decisive with him about the
Mhm.
decision, and they trusted
Mhm.
their instinct instead of sort of waffling on it. He needed to feel that from them in order to be okay with it himself.
Yeah.
And I think children are the same. They need to feel the confident decisiveness of their parents a lot of the time.
They do. Yeah. The frame helps them really have some freedom. Like we
Yeah.
say, the limits actually create freedom. It sounds counterintuitive, but it does. And whenever, um, whenever consequences happen and they can expect the same consequences, it just creates safety for children. It's very
Yes.
helpful.
Yes.
It sounds counterintuitive to us, but it is very helpful.
Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, I know we're going long. I can edit some of this down, but I feel like this with like doctors. Sometimes I have doctors who will give me 5 options, and
Yes.
I'm like, no, just tell me. Like, I'm like,
Uh-huh.
you are the expert. I need you to tell me what the best thing is right now. And I feel like
Right.
our kids probably feel that way too, of like, it's confusing when their parent is so flexible and giving them so many options. It's like, no, you're the expert. Tell me what to do, because I don't feel safe right now, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had that feeling.
Yeah.
With that family, one of the things that I also reminded them of is that the compassion you show for your child after you make this decision is also a compassion that you can extend to yourself. If you have a fear about the decision that you've made, join with the child. We've made this decision. I'm scared too. This was a very hard decision to make. Um, I'm really afraid. And this is going to be a hard thing for us. And I'm working through it.
Mm.
But the decision has been made. We think that we won't be able to, or maybe adults just don't practice a lot of self-compassion. So it's hard, or we don't believe that we will be resilient or something. But um, we can do both of those things after
Mm.
making a decision that's kind of difficult, or creating a consequence that was kind of hard. I mean, like, definitely one of the hardest things that we ever did was, my in-laws have this beautiful home that is so much fun on the water, but my daughter would behave really poorly.
Mm.
And so we would have to say, like, if you can't do this, this, and this while you're there, then we have to go. And we would go.
Mm,
That was hard. Like, and I'm talking like packing everything up, getting
yeah.
back in the car and driving home. That was a decision her daddy and I made. Like, this is what the consequence has to be.
Yeah.
And
And
then
it's
we stuck
hard.
through.
It's hard
Yes.
for so many reasons. You wanted to stay. And I think so often that's like the hard thing with holding to a limit is you're like, no, actually, like we let our limit go because we're like, no, you're inconveniencing me. I want to stay at the beach house,
Right.
but you have to hold the limit. And also there was probably some disappointment from the grandparents when you would pack
Of
it all up and
course.
leave. So then you have to navigate that. So it's hard all around. But my guess is that your daughter quickly learned that you were
Quickly.
serious about that limit.
Yeah. And the only reason we got to that consequence, so we worked through all the other consequences, like, well, let's try this. And then let's try this. And they are consequences. Like, they aren't punishments. They're not arbitrary. It's not like she gets yelled at when this happens, or I take away all of her markers or
Like her
something
favorite
that
toy.
doesn't have anything. Yeah. That doesn't have anything to do with the actual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
We try and have the consequences draw close to a real life consequence of that behavior. We did everything,
Mm,
and then it was like, well, now we got to do this. And we decided ahead of time, like,
mm,
this is what the consequence is going to have to be, you
yeah.
know?
And I don't know if you did this, but it seems like you, in situations like that, you may need to bring grandparents into the loop ahead of time
Yes.
and
Yeah,
say, just so
for
you
sure.
know, this behavior that we've seen has been so troublesome to us and probably to you too,
Right.
in your home when our kid
Right.
is acting like that, that we've told our daughter this will be the
Yes.
consequence and we're going to have to stick to it and it's going to stink and we're all going to be sad when we have to leave your house. But if it happens, we're going to leave your house. So you're kind of giving them a
Yeah,
heads up.
exactly. We did that because it made it easier for us to enforce, which is a great point. Implicit in there is that if you can't enforce the consequence, then don't start it.
Don't say it.
Yeah,
Never say
don't
it.
say it. Don't say it. Like, if you do this, this is going to happen. Um, it's good to warn the kid, kind of remind them of what the consequence will be. It's also great to tell them. I always try and start with, when you stop hitting me, I'll pick you up. Like, I try and be, when you,
Mhm.
then we will, kind
Not
of.
if you, but when you. Like with,
Then,
yeah.
yes. When,
Hmm.
yeah, if you do this, then this will happen. I always try and start with, when you do target behavior, then reward happens.
Mm,
Um, and most of the times that works. That works with a lot of children.
yeah.
But, on some occasions, you really do need to tell them, like, don't just let the consequence blow up on them. I don't feel like that is kind either.
Mm-mm.
I tell her, okay, now if you do X, Y, and Z here, then we will have to go,
Hmm.
you know?
And I love that distinction you just made between you use if you with the consequence couplets and when you with the praise, like the target,
Mm-hmm.
the behaviors you want.
Mm-hmm.
So you're
Mm-hmm.
assuming you're letting them know, I know you can do this and you will do this positive behavior. Whereas the consequence couplets are more, it may not happen.
Yeah.
You
Oh
you
man,
know?
I would love it. I would love
Yeah.
it. But just in case you can't resist that behavior, we're going to
Yes.
have to get out of here,
Yes. Absolutely.
you know?
Yeah. Well, this has been so helpful and insightful, Dr. Penry, and there's so much more in this little gem of a book. This is just one aspect of it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your book and how you set it up before we sign off?
All right. So, the kind of like what we have done here, I am really keeping the parent in mind and helping you create a customized plan for your family. So, like, I start with the mindset shifts, I start with understanding, I start with knowledge that I believe is going to empower you to then be the best parent in your system to your children with your temperament. That's why it's a workbook. So I'm
Mm,
really excited about the book. If you like this episode, if you like any of my episodes, um, then you like my approach. And I think that the workbook is really going to be a good fit for you. It is decisive. Like, I tell you, here's what science says is very good for the child. Da, 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 da. And here are some ways that you can kind of explore how you could express this in your family. It isn't as prescriptive as some other parenting books. It really is trying to empower you in your system with your child.
Mm. Well, and what I love about it is that you have like, you teach the principle, and then you have basically like an application section after, where you have
Yes.
questions to prompt them to think of specific scenarios to apply what they just read. Because I think so often we read this theory or we listen to a parenting podcast and we think, oh yeah, I'm going to set better limits with my kids. Yeah. But we don't sit down and think, what does that actually look like in my daily life for my children? And I love that it's built right into your book, opportunities for parents to process and apply so that they can take action on it. So I
Right. Like
love the way you set it up.
with the consequence couplets, for instance, I have a whole section on that where I give you several scenarios and I have you imagine a natural consequence to that is not a punishment. So often parents just default to that punishment, lose the favorite toy. So I work with you to actually be intentional about the next time this happens. What's a natural consequence? Like, I think that some of the examples I give are like pull books off shelf, scream in the house, run in the house, refuse to nap, won't put on proper attire to go outside. What are just the natural consequences of those behaviors? So, yeah.
Yes, so much application in there. You are just brilliant. You are a wealth of information, and I'm so glad you're my friend, so I get to benefit on a personal level too. And thank you so much for coming on 3 and 30.
Yeah, thank you.